Rome, October 1972. Morning bells echo across Piazza Annibaliano as three Catholic nuns walk slowly toward an apartment building. They carry breviary books and wear heavy Dominican habits. Heads bowed, lips moving in prayer. Italian intelligence has no idea this is a Mossad hit team. One of the nuns counts steps. 23 to the doorway. Another checks the street reflection in a shop window. Under the cloth are suppressed Beretta Model 70 pistols, already chambered. In less than 60 seconds, a Black September commander will be dead, and the killers will vanish behind Vatican diplomatic plates. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence operatives disguised as nuns assassinated Rashid Wael Mansour in the heart of Rome. Rashid Wael Mansour was born in Nablus in 1941, during the final years of the British Mandate. The 1948 war displaced his family to refugee camps outside Amman. By age 26, Mansour had developed a singular talent, creating infrastructure that left no trace. He didn't plant bombs or pull triggers. He built networks that allowed others to operate invisibly across European borders. After the 1967 Six-Day War shattered Palestinian military capabilities, militant organizations fragmented and reformed. Black September emerged from this chaos as Fatah's deniable operational arm. The group took its name from the Jordanian military's crushing of Palestinian forces in September 1970. Unlike traditional guerrilla groups, Black September operated as a decentralized network of cells conducting spectacular attacks designed for maximum media impact. Their defining operation came on September 5, 1972, when 8 operatives seized Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympic Village. The siege ended with 11 Israeli athletes dead, 5 Palestinian attackers killed, and 3 captured. The attack dominated global news cycles for weeks. It also triggered an immediate strategic response from Israeli intelligence. Mansour's role in Munich was structural rather than tactical. He had arranged safe houses in Frankfurt and Munich 6 months before the attack. He coordinated document forgery for 3 of the assault team members. His network provided escape routes through Italy that were never used. Israeli intelligence, conducting post-operation analysis through October 1972, identified Mansour as what they classified as a Category 2 target. Not a trigger puller, but a force multiplier whose removal would create operational paralysis across multiple cells. Associates described Mansour as methodical, never impulsive. A Jordanian intelligence officer who had monitored him before his move to Europe noted his pattern of living in modest apartments, avoiding Palestinian community gatherings, and changing residences every 8 to 10 months. This behavioral profile made him operationally valuable. It also made him extraordinarily difficult to locate. Mossad's European station had tracked fragmented intelligence on Mansour's movements since early 1971, but lacked consistent location data until August 1972, when a signals intercept placed him in Rome. By late September 1972, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir had authorized what would later be called Operation Wrath of God. The doctrine behind the campaign was deterrence through inevitability. The logic was straightforward. If planners and coordinators could never feel safe, operational tempo would slow, trust networks would fracture, and organizations would consume resources on internal security rather than external attacks. The policy represented a fundamental shift from reactive defense to proactive elimination. The obstacles facing Israeli intelligence were severe. Italy maintained diplomatic relations with multiple Arab states and would not extradite Palestinian militants. Rome's dense urban environment created surveillance challenges. Vatican City, an independent state within Rome, created jurisdictional complexity. Certain streets fell under Vatican authority, creating legal immunity zones where Italian police had limited operational freedom. Black September cells throughout Europe expected retaliation after Munich and had increased their counter-surveillance protocols. Additionally, any operation on European soil risked diplomatic crisis if operatives were captured or if civilian casualties occurred. Despite these challenges, planners identified a critical vulnerability by early October. Mansour had established a routine. Intercepted communications indicated he felt secure in Rome, believing the city's legal complexities would deter Israeli action. Surveillance teams operating from a rented apartment near Piazza Annibaliano documented his movements over 12 days. Mansour left his building each morning between 0800 hours and 0830 hours. He walked approximately 400 meters to a cafe, purchased a newspaper, then returned. The pattern held for 9 consecutive days. On October 10, 1972, Mossad's Rome station chief transmitted an encrypted message to Tel Aviv. Window confirmed. Authorization requested for kinetic action. The authorization arrived within 18 hours. The operation would be executed by a specialized unit designated in internal traffic as Unit Q. Planning shifted immediately to execution phase. During the operational planning sessions in early October, the lead operative, referred to in debriefs only as Operative 1, experienced what Mossad psychologists later categorized as anticipatory dissociation. The legend being constructed required him to move, speak, and think as a Catholic nun for periods extending beyond the actual operation. During a rehearsal in a safe house outside Rome, he found himself unconsciously making the sign of the cross when passing a church. The gesture was unplanned. In the post-operation psychological assessment, the evaluator noted that successful deep cover requires temporary personality fragmentation, but that such fragmentation carries cognitive costs that manifest weeks or months after an operation concludes. The mission continued without modification. Intercepted communications from October 8, 1972, reveal Mansour discussing his daughter's upcoming 7th birthday during a brief phone call to Aman. He mentioned purchasing a children's book in Italian to send home. Analysts noted nothing operationally relevant in the conversation. The book was found in his apartment after the operation, wrapped but not yet mailed. When Italian authorities inventoried his personal effects, the package remained unopened in an evidence locker for 16 months before being returned to his family. By October 12, 1972, the operation entered its execution phase. Mansour had maintained his morning routine for 14 consecutive days. Mossad's surveillance coordinator assessed probability of pattern continuation at 87%. The weather forecast predicted clear conditions. The window was 48 to 72 hours. The infrastructure for the operation was constructed across 6 days in early October. Mossad logistics officers, operating through a cover company registered in Luxembourg, acquired 3 Dominican-style habits from a religious goods supplier in Naples. The habits were selected for their heavy fabric and floor-length design, which would conceal shoulder holsters and allow freedom of movement. Each habit was altered by a tailor in Florence, not a Mossad asset, but a civilian contractor told the garments were for a theatrical production. The modifications included reinforced inner pockets and slightly widened sleeves to accommodate weapon draw. Cover identities were built using a technique Mossad called ecclesiastical camouflage. Forged documents identified the 3 operatives as members of a missionary order traveling from a convent near Assisi to Vatican administrative offices. The Vatican transit letters, created by a document specialist working from photographed exemplars, included authentic-looking stamps and signatures copied from legitimate correspondence obtained through a separate intelligence operation 6 months earlier. The letters would not survive detailed Vatican scrutiny, but they were designed only to pass visual inspection by Italian police if questioned during movement through the city. Weapons were Beretta Model 70 pistols in .22 caliber, fitted with custom suppressors manufactured in Tel Aviv. The .22 round was selected for specific operational characteristics: minimal recoil, allowing rapid follow-up shots, reduced muzzle flash in daylight conditions, and lower acoustic signature even without suppression. The suppressors reduced gunshot noise to approximately 110 decibels, comparable to a hammer striking wood. Each pistol was test-fired at an indoor range outside Rome to verify suppressor function and cycling reliability. Ammunition was subsonic hollow point, designed to maximize tissue damage while minimizing over-penetration risk in an urban environment. Communication systems relied on a technique called dead drop signaling. A fourth operative, designated as the surveillance coordinator, maintained position at a cafe with sight lines to Mansour's building. Each morning from October 8th through October 11th, this operative logged police patrol cadence, tram arrival intervals, and pedestrian traffic density. Data was recorded in a pocket notebook using a basic substitution code. Each evening, the notebook was left in a hollowed-out copy of an Italian newspaper at a predetermined location. The execution team retrieved the information within 2 hours. No electronic communications were used within Rome's city limits. Escape routes were planned using Vatican jurisdictional complexity as the primary asset. A rented Fiat 124 sedan carried diplomatic license plates obtained through an arrangement with a friendly embassy, identified in declassified documents only as Embassy X, likely a small African nation maintaining cordial relations with Israel. The plates would not withstand diplomatic verification, but would create hesitation among Italian traffic police, buying crucial minutes during exfiltration. The vehicle was positioned each morning at 0700 hours on a street segment that fell under Vatican Traffic Authority. The boundary line was marked by a small brass plaque embedded in the cobblestones, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Once the vehicle crossed that line, Italian police jurisdiction ended. The team consisted of 3 execution operatives and 1 surveillance coordinator. The execution operatives were selected based on physical profile: height between 160 and 170 centimeters, slight build, clean-shaven faces that could pass as feminine at medium distance when framed by a habit. All 3 had completed Unit Q's specialized training program, which included instruction in religious behavioral patterns, how to hold prayer beads, the rhythm of walking meditation, proper hand positions when carrying liturgical texts. Each operative knew only their specific role and the identities of their immediate partners. The surveillance coordinator knew the execution team's faces, but not their real names or operational histories. This compartmentalization meant that if any single operative was captured, the maximum compromise would be limited to 1 phase of the operation. The planning consumed 8 days. By October 11th, all elements were in position. The execution team had 72 hours before Mossad's Rome station chief would abort the operation due to pattern staleness. The assessment that Mansour's routine had persisted long enough that its continuation could no longer be assumed. October 12th, 1972. At 0740 hours, the surveillance coordinator entered the cafe across from Mansour's apartment building. He ordered espresso and positioned himself at a window table with a copy of Il Messaggero. Through the window, he had direct line of sight to the building's entrance. Morning traffic had begun to build: delivery trucks, early commuters, a street sweeper working methodically along the gutter. The coordinator noted 2 municipal police officers walking their regular route, passing Mansour's building at 0752 hours. Based on 12 days of observation, they would not return to this sector for minimum 90 minutes. Over the next 20 minutes, the coordinator watched the building entrance. At 0806 hours, an elderly woman emerged, walking a small dog. At 0809 hours, 2 men in work clothes left together, likely heading to a construction site. No sign of Mansour. The coordinator made a notation in his newspaper margin. A small mark that would mean nothing to a casual observer, but told the execution team, waiting 3 blocks away, that the window remained open. At 0812 hours, Mansour emerged from the building entrance. He wore a dark jacket and carried a leather satchel. His pace was unhurried. The surveillance coordinator observed him turn left, walking toward his usual cafe route. The coordinator stood, left exact change on the table, and walked outside. He crossed to a telephone booth on the opposite corner and lifted the receiver without inserting coins. This was the signal. 3 blocks away, the execution team saw the coordinator standing in the telephone booth and began moving. The 3 operatives, dressed in full Dominican habits, had spent the previous 40 minutes in a rented ground-floor apartment. They emerged onto the street at 0813 hours. Their movement was synchronized, but not obviously coordinated. One walked slightly ahead on the left side of the street. 2 walked together on the right side, 20 meters behind. They moved slowly, heads lowered, hands folded in, prayer position. One carried a rosary visibly. Another held a small breviary. The third had hands clasped empty. Under each habit was a shoulder holster containing a loaded Beretta Model 70. Each pistol had a round chambered and the safety off. Draw to fire time had been rehearsed to 1.2 seconds. Mansour walked at steady pace toward the cafe, 400 meters from his apartment. He was unaware of the 3 figures in religious dress converging on his position from behind. What Mansour didn't know was that Israeli intelligence had identified his morning routine down to the exact number of steps he took before checking traffic at the intersection. At 0814 hours, a complication emerged. A municipal police car turned onto the street and idled near the curb, approximately 40 meters from Mansour's position. The execution team immediately assessed the situation. The lead operative slowed pace, allowing the other 2 to close distance. They could not abort at this stage. They were already committed to the approach vector, and braking pattern would draw attention. The decision point was binary. Compress the timeline or abort entirely. The patrol car remained stationary for 90 seconds. The officer in the passenger seat was writing something on a clipboard. The engine idled. Mansour continued walking, now only 60 meters from the execution zone. The team compressed the timeline. The habit worked exactly as planned. No one looks twice at nuns in prayer near a Catholic church. The patrol car pulled away at 0814 hours and 28 seconds. The window reopened. By 0814 hours and 30 seconds, Mansour reached the small entryway of his target cafe. The execution team had closed to within 15 meters. The lead operative crossed the street at an angle, blocking sight lines from the cafe interior. The other 2 accelerated pace, still maintaining the appearance of unhurried, religious movement. Mansour's hand reached for the cafe door handle. At 0814 hours and 32 seconds, the 3 operatives formed a loose triangle at 2-meter distance from Mansour. The breviary books dropped to the pavement. The hand movement was simultaneous, 3 right hands reaching into habits, drawing suppressed Berettas in one smooth motion. Mansour turned at the sound of the books hitting stone. His expression showed confusion, not alarm. He had not yet processed what was happening. His mouth opened as if to speak or shout. The first round struck him in the upper chest before he produced sound. The suppressor reduced the gunshot to a sharp crack, similar to a wooden pallet breaking. Pedestrians 20 meters away did not immediately recognize it as gunfire. 12 rounds were fired in under 4 seconds. The operatives aimed for center mass, chest, and upper abdomen, following training that prioritized rapid incapacitation over precision. The .22 hollow point rounds tumbled on impact, creating wound channels that destroyed lung tissue and severed major blood vessels. Mansour collapsed backward against the cafe doorway. His legs folded, he dropped to the pavement in a seated position, then fell sideways. Blood began pooling beneath his torso. Elapsed time from first shot to collapse, 3.8 seconds. No words were spoken during the engagement. The 3 operatives separated immediately, moving in predetermined directions. The lead operative walked east, turning the corner within 12 seconds. The other 2 walked west together, maintaining the appearance of 2 nuns, leaving an unpleasant scene. They did not run. Running would have triggered pursuit. Their pace was brisk but controlled, the movement of people seeking to distance themselves from violence without appearing guilty of causing it. Within 45 seconds of the shooting, all 3 operatives had converged on the Fiat 124 parked 2 blocks away on Vatican-controlled street space. The habits were removed in the vehicle and placed in a canvas bag. Underneath, each operative wore civilian clothing, slacks, simple shirts, unremarkable. The driver, a 5th team member who had maintained position with the vehicle, started the engine as the operatives entered. The vehicle pulled into traffic at 0818 hours, crossing into Vatican jurisdictional lanes within 20 seconds. Italian traffic police observed a diplomatic-plated vehicle leaving the area but had no immediate cause to stop it. Jurisdiction ended at the brass boundary marker. The vulnerability exploited was absolute trust in religious immunity and the legal complexity of Vatican territorial authority. While the execution team moved toward exfiltration, the surveillance coordinator remained at the telephone booth for exactly 3 minutes, maintaining his cover as someone making a phone call. At 0817 hours, he hung up the receiver and walked calmly toward a bus stop 4 blocks away. He carried the morning newspaper folded under his arm. He boarded a bus at 0823 hours and rode it to Termini Station, where he purchased a train ticket to Florence using a false Italian identity. He would remain in Florence for 6 days before exfiltrating through Switzerland. The Fiat 124 followed a pre-planned route through Vatican-adjacent streets, then entered a parking structure near Villa Borghese at 0832 hours. The vehicle was abandoned. The diplomatic plates were removed and placed in a storm drain 3 blocks away. The canvas bag containing the habits was left in the vehicle trunk. The weapons were separated. Each operative carried his own Beretta in a shoulder bag, walking separately through the park before regrouping at a safe house in the Parioli district at 0915 hours. The entire execution phase, from Mansour emerging from his apartment to the team reaching the safe house, had consumed 63 minutes. At 0816 hours, the first civilian reached Mansour's body. A cafe employee had heard the sharp cracks and stepped outside to investigate. He found Mansour lying in blood, still breathing but unconscious. The employee ran back inside and called emergency services. An ambulance arrived at 0823 hours. Mansour was pronounced dead at 0826 hours before reaching the hospital. The cause of death was exsanguination from multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. Bullet fragments recovered during autopsy would later be identified as .22 caliber. By 0830 hours, Italian municipal police had cordoned off the area around Piazza Annibaliano. Investigators found 12 spent casings, all .22 caliber, scattered within a 2-meter radius. Witnesses reported seeing 3 nuns near the scene moments before the shooting, but descriptions were vague. Dark habits, heads covered, moving quickly away from the area. No one reported seeing weapons. The breviary books left on the pavement were traced to a religious goods supplier in Naples, but the purchase had been made with cash 2 weeks earlier and no records existed identifying the buyer. Italian intelligence services, including SISMI, understood within hours what had occurred but lacked leverage to act. The operation bore signatures of Israeli methodology: precision targeting, rapid extraction, religious camouflage. Officially, the case remained unsolved. Investigators pursued multiple leads that ended in dead ends, suggesting a level of operational sophistication beyond criminal organizations. The Fiat 124 was discovered in the Villa Borghese parking structure on October 13th. Forensic analysis revealed the vehicle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. The habits found in the trunk were similarly sterile. The diplomatic plates were never recovered. Israeli government officials issued no statements regarding Mansour's death. When questioned by journalists, spokespersons maintained that Israel did not comment on intelligence matters. The denials were transparent to those in the intelligence community. But transparency wasn't the point. The message being sent was not deniability, but inevitability. That participation in operations like Munich carried consequences that would reach into any city, behind any border, regardless of legal protection or diplomatic complexity. The tactical outcome was immediate and measurable. Rashid Wael Mansour, a Category 2 target responsible for logistics infrastructure supporting multiple Black September cells, was eliminated. His death created operational paralysis across safe-house networks in Italy, France, and West Germany. Encrypted communications, intercepted by SIGINT assets, over the following 6 weeks showed Black September leadership conducting internal security purges, suspecting penetration by Israeli intelligence. The purges consumed organizational resources and slowed operational tempo for approximately 5 months. 3 planned attacks were postponed or canceled during this period, according to intelligence assessments compiled in early 1973. The strategic cost was diplomatic friction with Italy. Italian officials privately protested the operation to Israeli counterparts, emphasizing that extrajudicial killings on Italian soil violated sovereignty and international law. Israeli responses, documented in declassified foreign ministry cables, acknowledged Italian concerns without accepting responsibility. The exchange followed established patterns. Italy needed to protest for domestic political consumption. Israel needed to maintain deniability for international legal reasons. But both sides understood the underlying calculation. Relations remained strained through mid-1973, but normalized following broader diplomatic shifts related to the Yom Kippur War. The operation also revealed tradecraft elements that forced adaptation. The use of religious camouflage became known within intelligence circles, reducing its future viability. Black September and other Palestinian militant groups began assessing threats differently, recognizing that civilian spaces and cultural symbols offered no protection. This recognition contributed to increased use of hardened safe houses, counter-surveillance protocols, and reduced reliance on predictable patterns. The arms race between intelligence services and militant networks escalated incrementally. For the operatives involved, the consequences were psychological and operational. Mossad's post-operation debriefings, portions of which were referenced in later memoirs and investigative reporting, noted that 2 of the 3 execution operatives exhibited symptoms consistent with operational stress within 6 months. One requested reassignment to analytical duties. Another continued field operations, but required extended psychological support. The 3rd operative remained in Unit Q and participated in subsequent operations through 1974. The surveillance coordinator exfiltrated successfully and returned to operational duty within 8 weeks. The Mansour operation became a template for subsequent targeted killings conducted under Operation Wrath of God. The methodology, deep cover using cultural camouflage, rapid kinetic action in public space, and exploitation of jurisdictional complexity for extraction, was replicated with variations in Paris, Cyprus, and Athens over the following 14 months. Each operation refined specific elements, but maintained the core structure established in Rome. The moral calculation at the center of the operation remains contested. Was Mansour a legitimate military target or a civilian murdered without trial? From one perspective, he was a combatant in an asymmetric conflict who had directly enabled the Munich massacre by providing infrastructure to the assault team. Removal of such infrastructure nodes, in this view, represented legitimate strategic action against an organization conducting terrorist operations. The precision of the strike, 12 rounds fired, 1 target killed, no collateral casualties, demonstrated restraint compared to alternatives like aerial bombardment or large-scale arrests that might have triggered broader violence. From another perspective, the operation represented extrajudicial execution that violated Italian sovereignty, international law, and the principle that criminal suspects deserve trial. Mansour, regardless of his alleged activities, was killed on a Rome street without formal legal process. The use of religious camouflage added layers of sacrilege, weaponizing cultural symbols to facilitate murder. This perspective argues that such operations normalize assassination as state policy, eroding legal frameworks designed to protect civilians and establish boundaries between law, enforcement, and warfare. The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Mansour. If you believe state survival justifies preemptive elimination of threats, the operation represents rational security policy. If you believe legal process must constrain state violence even against dangerous actors, the operation represents a fundamental violation of civilized norms. Both positions contain internal logic. Both have consequences. The question that remains is this: when states fight terror by becoming invisible killers operating beyond legal constraints, do they reduce violence in the long term, or teach the world that nowhere is sacred and no symbol immune from weaponization? The Rome operation succeeded tactically. Its strategic legacy is still being written. What's your take on the line between justice and murder when law fails to reach across borders? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider where that line should be drawn, share it with someone who needs to think about these questions. The history of covert operations is the history of calculated violations. The question is whether the calculation ever truly balances.